Jax's revenge domain. At the company dinner, I watched Bryce Calderon set his fork down slowly when HR mentioned they'd sent his promotion package 9 weeks ago. His manager said he gave it to you, she added casually. Then I guess he didn't tell you why I hid it. Her smile died instantly. My face went pale. It's strange how the truth slips out when no one is trying to hide it. My name is Preston Winters, and I thought I was smarter than a 51-year-old operations director who'd been grinding at Vanguard System Solutions since before I graduated high school. I was wrong, dead wrong, and that mistake cost me everything I'd built in my 8-year consulting career. Let me tell you how a Stanford MBA with McKinsey credentials got outmaneuvered by a guy who still prints his emails and keeps a Rolodex on his desk. It started 6 months ago when I joined Vanguard as strategic planning manager. Fresh off a promotion track at my consulting firm, pulling down $145,000 annually, ready to revolutionize this mid-tier Phoenix software company that clearly needed some modern management techniques. I'd spent 3 years at McKinsey optimizing Fortune 500 operations, then 5 years at a boutique strategy firm helping tech startups scale. Vanguard felt like the perfect opportunity to apply everything I'd learned to a company with serious growth potential but outdated leadership approaches. My recruitment had been aggressive. Logan Davidson, the 58-year-old founder and CEO, headhunted me specifically after seeing my work restructuring a struggling ERP company in Denver. We connected over coffee at the Arizona Biltmore, discussing his vision for taking Vanguard from regional player to national competitor. The company was solid, $80 million annual revenue, 280 employees, strong client retention. But Logan knew they needed strategic thinking to break through their growth ceiling. I built this company with handshake deals and personal relationships, Logan told me during that first meeting. But the market's changing. We need someone who understands how to scale systematically. That someone was supposed to be me. Bryce Calderon was my first problem. Senior operations director, 23 years with the company, the kind of old-school professional who'd built their enterprise resource planning systems from the ground up back when Y2K was still a genuine concern. The guy was a dinosaur, and I could smell the extinction coming. During my first week, I sat in on one of his client presentations, watching him flip through actual printed PowerPoint slides while explaining database architecture to executives who were probably younger than his tenure at the company. It was painful. These people were treating him like some kind of oracle, nodding along to his methodical explanations about system integration and data migration protocols. But here's what made it worse. He was actually good at it. Bryce had this quiet authority that came from solving real problems for real clients over decades. When he spoke about system vulnerabilities or implementation timelines, people listened because his track record was flawless. 0 failed deployments in 5 years. Client satisfaction scores consistently above 95%. Revenue growth in his division averaging 18% annually. I knew exactly what this was. Legacy worship. Companies get attached to their old guard, even when those employees become anchors dragging them down. Bryce represented everything that was wrong with Vanguard's approach. Reactive instead of proactive, relationship-based instead of metrics-driven, experience-based instead of innovation-focused. But here's what made it personal. Logan Davidson treated Bryce like his right hand. Every major decision went through Bryce first. Every client strategy session included his input. Every quarterly review highlighted his contributions to our revenue growth. The founder had built his company around people like Bryce, reliable, competent, deeply invested in long-term success rather than quarterly optimization. I spent my first month analyzing Bryce's actual performance metrics, looking for vulnerabilities in his seemingly perfect record. Client retention in his division, 94%. Project completion rate, 98%. Revenue growth year over year, 22%. Cost overruns, virtually non-existent. On paper, the numbers looked bulletproof, but numbers don't tell the whole story. What they didn't show was opportunity cost, scalability limitations, resistance to modernization. Bryce was a bottleneck wrapped in a success story. His methodical approach worked for Vanguard's current client base, but it couldn't scale to the aggressive expansion Logan envisioned. His personal relationships with clients created dependency rather than systematic processes. His preference for proven solutions over innovative approaches limited competitive differentiation. More importantly, his influence over Logan was preventing the kind of strategic transformation that would position Vanguard for real growth. Every proposal I submitted for workflow automation, client acquisition optimization, or competitive positioning came back with notes like, "Run this by Bryce first," or "Make sure this aligns with our operational philosophy," the operational philosophy that was keeping us stuck in 1995. I started building my case systematically. Competitive analysis showing how similar companies were gaining market share through digital transformation. Client surveys revealing demand for more agile service delivery. Financial modeling demonstrating the revenue impact of modernization initiatives. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Vanguard needed new leadership to unlock its potential. The opportunity presented itself in August when Logan announced the creation of a new C-suite position, Executive Vice President of Operations, someone to oversee all client systems, manage the technical teams, report directly to the CEO, compensation package starting at $220,000 plus equity. It was the role I'd been positioning myself for since my first day. But Logan's announcement came with an uncomfortable addendum that made my stomach tighten. "Obviously, we'll be considering internal candidates first." Everyone in that conference room looked at Bryce. 23 years of institutional knowledge, personal relationships with every major client, Logan's obvious favorite. The writing wasn't just on the wall. It was highlighted, bolded, and underlined in corporate speak that everyone understood, but nobody wanted to acknowledge directly. That's when I realized I needed to level the playing field. I scheduled a one-on-one with Nicole Martinez, our HR director. 45 years old, competent enough, but the kind of administrator who follows process instead of thinking strategically. I'd observed her during my first month, thorough, rule-oriented, genuinely concerned about employee development, but lacking the broader vision to see beyond immediate HR functions. I positioned our conversation carefully, choosing the small conference room near her office during the late afternoon lull when most people had already mentally checked out for the day. "I'm concerned about succession planning," I told her, adopting the thoughtful tone I'd perfected during client consultations. "What happens when our senior staff retires? Are we developing the next generation of leadership?" She nodded along, probably thinking I was being proactive and forward-thinking. Nicole appreciated employees who considered long-term organizational health. Take Bryce, for example. Incredible institutional knowledge, but at 51, we should be transitioning some of his responsibilities to ensure continuity. "Well, he's not exactly retirement age," she replied, but I could see her processing the succession planning angle. "Of course not. I'm talking about gradual development opportunities, maybe bringing in some external perspectives for the new EVP role, creating a more diverse leadership team." I watched her make notes on her legal pad. She was old school enough to handwrite everything before transferring important points to digital files. "Good. Seeds planted in permanent ink. You raise valid points about succession planning," she said finally. "I'll mention this during my next leadership review with Logan." 2 weeks later, Nicole mentioned that Logan had specifically requested Bryce be fast-tracked for the EVP position. Executive decision, bypass the normal interview process, promote from within. She delivered this news during our regular check-in meeting with the casual tone of someone sharing routine administrative updates. That's when I knew subtlety wasn't going to work. The promotion package arrived via email on a Tuesday afternoon in late August. Subject line, Executive VP Operations, Bryce Calderon, final approval. I was CC'd because of my role in strategic planning transitions, which gave me legitimate access to confidential executive communications. I opened the attachment with mounting dread. Salary increased to $220,000. Stock options valued at approximately $150,000 over 4 years. Direct CEO reporting structure. Start date October 1st. Logan's personal signature at the bottom with a handwritten note. "Well-deserved, Bryce. Looking forward to this next chapter." Below that, Nicole had added implementation details, announcement timing, transition responsibilities, onboarding schedule for expanded duties. Everything was finalized, professional, completely legitimate. My cursor hovered over the forward button for about 30 seconds while I calculated the implications. Bryce would get the EVP role, consolidate his influence over company operations, and effectively block any meaningful modernization initiatives for years. Logan would continue deferring to his judgment on strategic decisions. My expertise would remain marginalized, My McKinsey training reduced to generating reports that supported Bryce's traditional approaches. I closed the email and deleted it from my sent items folder. Simple as that. Here's what you have to understand. I wasn't sabotaging Bryce out of malice. This was strategic resource allocation. Vanguard needed leadership that could scale, innovate, adapt to market changes. Bryce was comfortable, reliable, predictable. But comfortable doesn't drive growth. Reliable doesn't disrupt markets. Predictable doesn't create competitive advantages. I was protecting the company from its own sentimental decision-making. Over the next few weeks, I carefully managed the narrative around the promotion timeline. When Logan asked about the EVP announcement during our monthly strategic review, I mentioned that HR was still finalizing the transition logistics and communication strategy. These executive-level changes require careful coordination, I explained, using the consultative tone that made complex processes sound appropriately sophisticated. We want to ensure all stakeholders are properly aligned before making official announcements. Logan nodded approvingly. He appreciated thorough planning, especially for significant organizational changes. When Bryce inquired about the EVP announcement during our routine project updates, I explained that HR was developing a comprehensive communication plan to maximize the positive impact of his promotion. We want to make sure everything's aligned before making it official, I told him, adopting that collaborative tone that makes people feel included in strategic processes. Nicole's coordinating with Logan on timing and messaging. Bryce nodded, trusting and patient, probably grateful that someone was handling the bureaucratic details while he focused on operational execution. The guy actually thanked me for managing the transition smoothly, completely unaware that there was no transition to manage. Meanwhile, I started building relationships with Logan's other advisors, casual conversations about organizational structure, strategic vision, the importance of fresh perspectives in leadership roles. I didn't directly criticize Bryce. That would have been counterproductive and obvious. Instead, I highlighted the value of bringing external talent into senior positions. Sometimes the best thing for a veteran employee is a strong team around them, I suggested during one executive lunch at the Phoenician Resort, where Logan liked to conduct informal strategy sessions. Support systems that complement their strengths while addressing any potential gaps in emerging market trends. Logan listened thoughtfully, asked pointed questions about competitive positioning, seemed receptive to the idea of expanding the leadership team before finalizing major internal promotions. Perfect. I could see the wheels turning in Logan's analytical mind. By early October, I'd identified two excellent external candidates for the EVP role. Rebecca Crawford, a former McKinsey principal with 10 years of enterprise software experience, currently consulting for Fortune 100 companies, and Michael Torres, who'd successfully scaled operations at 3 different tech companies, most recently taking a Denver startup from $20 million to $180 million revenue in 4 years. Both were younger than Bryce, both had impressive consulting backgrounds, both were eager to join a growing company with clear advancement opportunities. I scheduled informal interviews, positioning them as strategic advisory conversations with Logan to explore potential organizational enhancements. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Let Logan meet these candidates, recognize their potential, realize that internal promotion might be limiting Vanguard's growth opportunities, maybe create a different role for Bryce, something that honored his experience while bringing fresh energy to the executive level. Win-win for everyone, really. Rebecca's interview went exceptionally well. She presented a comprehensive analysis of our competitive position, identified 3 specific areas where process optimization could increase margins by 12–15%, and outlined a digital transformation roadmap that aligned perfectly with Logan's expansion vision. Her McKinsey credentials spoke for themselves, but more importantly, she understood how to translate strategic frameworks into practical implementation. Michael's session was equally impressive. He'd led similar operations at companies facing identical scaling challenges, had specific experience with enterprise software client management, and brought proven methodologies for streamlining service delivery. During lunch at the Arizona Country Club, he sketched out an organizational restructuring proposal that would double our client capacity within 18 months. Logan was clearly intrigued by both candidates. He asked detailed follow-up questions, requested additional materials, mentioned the possibility of creating senior positions that would complement our existing leadership strengths. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Then came the company dinner that changed everything. Annual celebration at the Phoenix Country Club, all employees plus spouses, casual networking mixed with recognition ceremonies. I was feeling confident, relaxed, wearing my lucky navy blazer and the Hermes tie I'd bought to celebrate closing my first major consulting deal. Logan had been impressed with both external candidates. Nicole had mentioned that they were re-evaluating the EVP timeline to ensure the best possible outcome. I was sitting across from Bryce at our table, watching him methodically work through his herb-roasted chicken while making polite conversation with Isabel Crawford, our CFO. The guy was completely oblivious. No stress, no anxiety about the promotion delay, just steady, patient confidence that everything would work out according to plan. It was almost admirable, in a naive sort of way. His daughter Chloe had joined us for dinner. 19 years old, sophomore at Stanford studying systems engineering, clearly inherited her father's analytical mindset, but with the energy and optimism that comes from believing the world is full of unlimited possibilities. She was telling everyone about her internship at a biotech startup, describing complex data modeling projects with the same methodical precision Bryce brought to client presentations. "Dad taught me that good systems solve problems before they become crises," she said, smiling at Bryce with obvious affection. "Whether it's software architecture or just organizing your life, the principles are the same." Watching their interaction, I felt a brief moment of something uncomfortable, not guilt exactly, but awareness that my strategic maneuvering was affecting real people with real relationships, not just organizational chart positions. I pushed the feeling aside. Business decisions couldn't be driven by sentiment. Nicole was circulating between tables, making small talk, checking in with employees and their families. She stopped by our section around 8:30, wine glass in hand, wearing that warm smile she reserved for social occasions when she could step outside her HR administrator role. "Hey Bryce," she said casually, "you must be excited about the new terms. Should help you finally get some breathing room with Chloe's Stanford tuition." The comment was innocent enough, the kind of friendly observation HR directors make when they're genuinely happy about employees receiving good news. I felt my stomach tighten slightly. Nicole wasn't supposed to know about specific compensation details yet. But HR directors sometimes get ahead of themselves with friendly conversation, especially at company social events where professional boundaries naturally relax. Bryce looked confused. Fork paused halfway to his mouth. "The terms? I thought those were still being finalized." And that's when Nicole's expression shifted. Slowly. Confusion first, then concern, then something that looked uncomfortably like realization. "Finalized? No, we sent the complete package 9 weeks ago." I emailed it directly to Preston for review and forwarding. The table went quiet. Not dramatically, not movie style, just that subtle shift when a conversation suddenly requires everyone's attention. Isabel stopped mid-sentence about quarterly projections. Chloe looked between her father and me with the sharp awareness of someone who'd grown up around corporate dynamics. Even the background noise of adjacent tables seemed to fade as our little section became an island of sudden tension. Bryce turned to look at me, and for the first time in 9 weeks of careful manipulation, I felt genuinely unprepared. "9 weeks ago?" he repeated quietly. I forced a smile, reached for my water glass to buy time. Must have gotten lost in the shuffle. You know how these executive transitions get complicated. But Bryce wasn't smiling back. Neither was Isabel. Neither was Nicole, whose face was now showing that particular expression HR directors get when they realize something is seriously wrong with their carefully managed processes. "Lost in the shuffle?" Bryce repeated, his voice carrying that same methodical precision he brought to client problem solving. The conversation at surrounding tables continued normally. Laughter, clinking glasses, the usual corporate dinner atmosphere. But our little section had become an island of tension that seemed to grow denser with each passing second. Nicole bit her lip, clearly regretting her casual comment. Maybe there was a communication mix-up. "I can resend everything tomorrow morning." "That would be helpful," Bryce said, still looking at me with that steady gaze that made me feel like a specimen under a microscope, just to make sure we're all aligned. I nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. Let's sync up first thing Monday and get everything sorted out." But something in Bryce's eyes had changed. Not anger, not accusation, just a quiet alertness that hadn't been there before. Like someone who'd just noticed that the ground beneath their feet might not be as solid as they'd assumed. The rest of dinner proceeded normally on the surface. Dessert, coffee, Logan's annual speech about company growth and appreciation for dedicated employees. But I could feel Bryce's attention on me throughout the evening, subtle and persistent, like a weight I couldn't shake. When the event finally wrapped up around 10 p.m., I made a point of shaking hands with everyone at our table, maintaining that professional warmth that keeps situations from escalating unnecessarily. "Great dinner," I told Bryce, gripping his hand firmly. "Looking forward to getting those promotion details sorted out next week." He returned the handshake with equal firmness. "I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of it." Something about his phrasing made my chest tighten, but I maintained my smile until he disappeared into the parking lot with Chloe. Driving home that night through the empty Phoenix streets, I convinced myself the situation was manageable. Nicole had created a minor embarrassment, but nothing that couldn't be smoothed over with proper communication. Bryce might have some questions, but he was reasonable, practical, focused on solutions rather than blame. We could frame the delay as careful due diligence, strategic planning, making sure the transition was handled properly for maximum organizational benefit. I'd just need to accelerate my timeline slightly. Monday morning, I arrived early to get ahead of any potential complications. Vanguard's offices were quiet at 7:30 a.m., just the security guard and a few dedicated early arrivals. I planned to spend an hour reviewing the external candidates' materials and preparing talking points before dealing with the Bryce situation. Instead, I found an email from Nicole waiting in my inbox. Sent at 6:45 a.m., subject line, EVP package, please confirm receipt, and status. She'd forwarded the original promotion email, all of it. Logan's approval, the compensation details, the October 1st start date, everything. But what made my chest tighten was the email chain below the original message. My reply from 9 weeks ago, received, will review with Bryce first thing and ensure he's prepared for the transition. Thanks for the efficient processing. Nicole's follow-up 2 weeks later. Has Bryce signed the agreement yet? Logan's asking about announcement timing. My response, still reviewing details with him. Should have everything finalized by end of week. Another follow-up from Nicole 3 weeks after that. Preston, Logan needs confirmation on the EVP timeline. Can you provide status update? My final response. Bryce wants to ensure he's fully prepared for the expanded responsibilities. Give us another week for thorough review. Reading through that email chain was like watching a time-lapse video of my own deception. Each response carefully crafted, professionally reasonable, completely dishonest. And now Nicole had sent the entire thread to me with a simple note. Please confirm that Bryce has seen all of these materials. Logan is requesting clarification on the promotion timeline before this morning's executive meeting. I stared at my computer screen, calculating options. The situation was more complex than I'd anticipated, but not unsalvageable. I could position this as miscommunication, protective management, ensuring proper preparation before major transitions. Then Bryce walked into the office, not rushing, not aggressive, just his usual methodical pace. But there was something different in how he carried himself, more focused, more deliberate, like someone who'd spent the weekend analyzing a complex problem and reached some uncomfortable conclusions. He stopped by my desk, coffee in hand, wearing that same patient expression he'd maintained throughout 9 weeks of my careful manipulation. Morning, Preston. Do you have a few minutes to chat? Professional, calm, reasonable, absolutely terrifying. The meeting that followed lasted exactly 12 minutes and destroyed 8 years of career advancement. Bryce didn't raise his voice. He didn't make threats or dramatic accusations. He simply presented facts with the same methodical precision he brought to client presentations. The email chain, the timeline, the external candidates I'd been positioning as alternatives. Logan joined us halfway through, summoned by Nicole, who'd apparently decided that HR protocols required immediate executive intervention. By 10:12, Logan had heard enough. Preston, effective immediately, you're being reassigned to junior analyst role in our operations support division. 50% salary reduction, no equity participation, 6-month probationary status. 6 months later, I'm still in that cubicle, still reporting to Bryce, who treats me with professional courtesy and absolute authority. The external candidates I'd recommended are now Director of Innovation and Director of Strategic Partnerships, both reporting to Bryce in his expanded EVP role. Logan created the position specifically to bring in the fresh thinking I'd identified, while keeping the institutional knowledge and trusted leadership I'd tried to eliminate. It was exactly the outcome everyone needed, achieved through collaboration instead of manipulation. Every day, sitting in that cubicle, I'm reminded of the most expensive lesson I've ever learned. Experience beats credentials. Trust beats tactics. And trying to bury a veteran employee will get you buried instead. Bryce Calderon didn't need revenge. He just needed to tell the truth. And the truth was enough to destroy me more completely than any vindictive scheme ever could. Sometimes the most devastating response to manipulation is simply exposing it for what it is, letting the facts speak for themselves while the manipulator drowns in their own deception.